So this is a project for Derezzed, and I did one section of the track just to give a taste of how the song sounds like, and here it is. So that's the partial track for Derezzed, and let's get straight to it. Track is a 120, which is really typical for a dance track, and it's at 4/4. And okay, let's start with the beats. For the hats, it's got this sparky type sound, the original one, so I couldn't find something that's super close to it, but I found something that gave the same vibe to it, and that is under tambourine. Let's zoom in. Tambourine tap topper. So if you go under here, you'll find a tambourine tap topper, which is over here that you can see. And I thought it captured the vibe pretty well, so I just dragged that in straight into the timeline. And the thing that I added on is a enveloper, and just to give it more attack and to adjust the decay a little bit, here's how it sounds with it and without. So you can hear with it, it's got a bit of that sort of like percussive type, compressed type sound where you get a little click at the start. And I think that captures the vibe of the original track much closer. Now, let's go to the kick first. And the kick is something that you can find in electronic drum kits and the drums and percussion TR909 kit. And that's the kick that I use, which sounds like this. Really straightforward. And the interesting thing is now we can go to the snare. And we have a drum machine. And I just put a snare, and under the snare is a seismic snare. You can select it under snares once you click on this. And the interesting thing is a seismic snare already is sort of that, has that kind of white noise kind of feel. Here it sounds. So it's got that clappy white noise kind of feel, but I wanted even more noise. So how did I go about that? I did something that might interest you. It's actually, I used a test oscillator and I set it to white noise, right? So this thing is actually a white noise generator, and it's under, you can find it under utility, test oscillator, stereo. So, and I selected white noise. You can select different generators. So if I take out the noise gate, this is what you hear. So it's just on all the time. But I turn on a noise gate, which is closed most of the time. And I set the sidechain. Now, sidechain is sort of controlling a track from another track to bus 8. Bus 8, here we go. And I sent this snare out into bus 8. Bus 8. So instead of stereo out, which is the normal one, I sent it to bus 8. And what happens is then this signal here if you look at bus 8, you'll see that the meters are jumping because we're sending it out in the bus 8, right? But we're also sidechaining the noise. Here, this noise gate here, it's under a percussion gate, and I set it, the release and the attack like this. And you can see that every time this snare plays, it'll open up the gate and you'll hear the white noise come through. So if we solo this as well, you hear this. And you'll see the open and close over here. Just see that? It's closed right now. Open, open. So that gives more of a white noise snare kind of feeling, which when you hear them together, sounds like that. Sorry, that's muted. So is this with the white noise? This without. So with the white noise, it's much more, has that high-end noise sound about it, which I think captures the original vibe pretty well as well. Now on to the synths. Synths are pretty straightforward. I use a lot of ES2, and in this case I use a tutorial setting. I use an analog saw in it, which is sort of initialization for analog saw. So it's pretty much just a basic analog saw. And from there, I added an overdrive, and in this case it's hard and loud. You want it to be a bit, you know, really harsh, and it's a bit of phaser as well. And I use a 10-stage phaser. So in this case, it's sort of like giving it a bit of a, let's listen to this. So you can see because of the phaser, it sort of evolves a bit, the sound. You want it to have a bit of that organic feeling. And then you can see that there are tons of layers of the same synth. I mean, the same notes, but different synths. So I'm going to open up automation, and you can see that they come in at different places. Like there's this synth here that slowly comes in. This one comes in at the start and combines with this too. So it's, I'm not a big synth head. So I use a lot of multiple synths to sort of combine into one singular sound. And in this case, I use another ES2, and this time it was just a basic user default, which sounds pretty straightforward. If I take out the amp, it's going to sound like this. So I wanted a bit of grit, so I added a guitar amp, and I used the distorted Frankenweed drive. And when you put that on, it becomes much more ballsy. If you hear it now. Which is pretty cool. And I sent all of this to a reverb as well. And the reverb is not your usual film score reverb. I use a large space spring reverb, modern spring. So there's a bit of that spring type, not so spacious type sound. You can hear that it's a spring. And yeah, so if you hear these two together, it sounds like this. So much more dimension to the sound. And now there's even one more dimension to the sound. And I use tutorial setting analog saw 3 oscillator. That's the setting I use, and I use an amp on this as well. Sunshine Combo Distort under Distorted, one of my favorites. And this one doesn't come in so early. It sort of comes in from 0 until high, because this one is sort of on the high range, and let's hear how it sounds. So it gets bigger and bigger, and this one is an octave above, and if you put them together, you hear this. And from this point, you start hearing the bottom track a bit more, the octave. which is pretty cool. You want it to sort of evolve. With these lines that repeat, you want it to sort of evolve as it goes along. So that's how I did it for this particular track. And there's a bass that goes on. This is a pretty straight up bass. It's also an ES2 under synth leads, funk pulse lead. And then I spread it a little bit with a stereo spreader, just a basic default one. And I don't think I did an EQ on it. Yep, EQ is not doing anything. So this one as well is has a little sort of lift as it goes along, and it just sounds like this. And keeps growing and growing and growing. And the other bass is the darker, deeper bass. It's under Alchemy. I used it analog dark bass. That's what you can find under bass, and you'll find analog dark bass. It's under sub, and it's also has a little rise going on here, and here's how it sounds. Just a really dark bass, and just to give it that fatness underneath. Yep, and that's it. And when you reach this section here, it's just bringing in the same tambourines, the same snares, and the same kicks, and yeah, and everything sort of just goes on, but the bass plays differently. It goes like that. So it's kind of these two going. And I added another loop, which is a filter groove topper. Which you can find. All these toppers, if you see the name topper, is meant to be on top of a beat. So a lot of hats, a lot of snare type sounds. And I just wanted to up the groove a little bit more, so I tossed it on top of the tambourine, and you get this kind of thing. And the whole beat sort of gets a bit bigger, right, with everything. And yeah, just with everything. And it's just like dropping out the beats, bringing them back in, and this part sort of repeating stuff. It's just repeating notes. I think originally they just cut it up and use some sort of like a thing to give it some jitter, but this one is just played MIDI. Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward, and that's it. That's how you construct something like that. It's just the bass line, the synths, and the beats.